Welcome back to our guidebook unit lesson 4, the Birchbark House. My name is Lisa Keys and I'm a 5th grade teacher at Sallyville Elementary. Our last lesson we read chapter 3 from the First Americans, Prehistory to 1600, A History of the U.S., Book 1. We determined the reasons why people moved to the New World. If you'll review with me and remember, we have read before Columbus and discussed how people came to the New World. An ark, theories were boats or maybe walked. We watched a video and enjoyed Ice Age and got to see from a fictional aspect how people lived during the Ice Age. And then we looked yesterday to prove in our last lesson the reasons why people moved to the New World. Warmer climates, they were able to hunt animals, and there was more available for them there. Today we will read chapter 4 from the First Americans, Prehistory, 1600s, A History of the U.S. book. Not in pairs, unfortunately. Maybe we could do this if you have someone at home or you have access to the book, but I will be reading this one to you today. And I will also read aloud. Finally, we get to introduce the novel, The Birchbark House. Then we'll integrate information from the multiple texts to deepen our understanding of the time period of this unit. If you have access to these books, or if you have your student resource book that might have copies of these, you can read along with me as I read from the First Americans, The Birchbark House. You have a reading log, maybe you've been keeping notes of the different lessons, and also your vocabulary chart like our word wall we've been adding to, and your Ice Age viewing guide was something that we filled in as we watched the video. It will help us review the ways we can integrate all of this information. We're going to read chapter 4. As I read chapter 4, think about new information about the Native American way of life. This is very interesting. How the first Americans became Indians. Those first Americans were on their own in the New World. Thousands of years would go by before Christopher Columbus sailed across the Atlantic Ocean from distant Europe. Columbus called the first Americans Indians because he thought he was in the Indies, way over by China. That was a big mistake. But it would be a long time before anyone realized how wrong Columbus was. So the name Indian stuck. It's what we use most often today. Some people use Native Americans instead of Indians, although the word native is confusing. This is very important. Anyone who is born in a country is a native of that country. So many of us are Native Americans. I was born in this country, Native American. Native also means to have an origin or beginning in a country. Well, as far as we know, no people is native to America. Our ancestors all came from somewhere else. Remember the land bridge? Remember Africa, Asia, and Europe where they walked? Still, the people who came over the Bering Strait were here long before anyone else. So you can see why it makes sense to call them Native Americans. Indians, because of what Christopher Columbus thought. First Americans, or Native Americans. They're all good names. Most Indians call themselves simply the people in their various languages. If we go back in time 10,000 years, those first Americans, who now were spread out over the 2 American continents, were beginning to do some remarkable things. Most of them continued to hunt. They were good at that. They knew how to make animals stampede into deep ditches or watery bogs where they could easily be speared. Remember, we learned the bow and arrow had not even been invented. They only used the spears. When it came to spearheads, theirs were the best. They made them of flint, a hard stone they chipped at until it was sharp and deadly. They invented a dart thrower, a wooden handle with a hooked tip that worked like a missile launcher. It was called an atlatl. The hunter would throw the atlatl as the ball player throws a pitch. They meant he no longer had to creep up and stab or choke his prey. The atlatl probably saved a lot of human lives. It didn't do much for the animals. If you have an opportunity to go to Poverty Point and have some people show you things, they have atlatls there that you can throw. In fact, so many animals got killed that some of them became extinct. That means they all died out. But in most cases, their disappearance wasn't because of hunters. The mammoths, for instance, were just too big. After the end of the Ice Age, when the climate warmed up, mammoths couldn't adjust. They drank huge amounts of water. A family of thirsty mammoths could drain a pond. Scientists think they couldn't find enough water to drink or grass to eat. More than 100 species of animals, species the scientific word for groups of plants and animals, became extinct between 6,000 and 10,000 years ago. No one knows why all of them died. Perhaps they were infected by germs carried by humans. Maybe hunters killed too many of some of the species. That was too bad, because there was so much food on the land that people could make choices to catch fish, or dig for clams and oysters, or gather nuts and berries and roots. And some tribes did just that. They became gatherers. Others became farmers, among the best in the world. They took wild plants and bred them, and they developed corn, potatoes, sweet potatoes, and squash. They learned to make chocolate from the cocoa plant. They found corn kernels that popped when heated. They discovered plants and herbs that could heal sickness. They grew tobacco and peppers and tomatoes. None of these plants was known in other parts of the world. Indian basket weavers wove baskets so tight they could hold liquids and so handsome that people in later generations put them in museums. Potters learned to make sculptured figures in useful pots and bowls. Weavers designed colorful rugs. Native American thinkers created mathematically precise calendars. Goldsmiths made some of the most beautiful jewelry the world has ever seen. Indians invented the hammock, the canoe, snowshoes, and a game called lacrosse. They learned to gather rubber from rubber plants. They made rubber balls and played ball games. They built pyramids and temples and cities. But no single tribe of Indians did all of those things. Native Americans developed different lifestyles and different languages, just as Europeans and Africans and Asians did. It all depended on who their leaders were and where they lived. One thing Indians never did was make good use of the wheel. Their lives would have been much easier if they had. In Mexico, the Indians put wheels on their children's toys, but they never made wheeled wagons for themselves. Perhaps that was because they didn't have horses to pull them. When people came from Spain to America at the end of the 15th century, they brought horses and mules and oxen. In the 16th century, horses completely changed Indian life, just as the automobile and airplane changed life in the 20th century America. Can you imagine hunting buffalo on foot? Now jump on horseback and see the difference it makes. When the horse came to America, it was returning home. A tiny horse ancestor had lived in America in the Ice Age times. Some of those ancient dog-sized horses had trotted across Beringia to Asia. In Asia, they grew large and galloped on to Europe and Africa. Those stayed in America became extinct. As we look at the words that we've seen from this chapter, add these following to your list. We have the word extinct, as we saw from our contact clues, it told us that that meant no longer exist, died out. We also discussed the word native. It's a very interesting concept. Native means originated, was born in, but also had origins of that area. So are there Native Americans? Because everyone came from somewhere else. That was very interesting as we discussed that and read in the chapter. As we go through the little bit of discussion of some of the main ideas of the next sections, I want you to think about useful ways of introducing quotations. Now, when we have studied writing in different areas, we've used RACE acronym, where you restate, you answer, you cite evidence, and you explain. Well, in the citing evidence, we want to give credit to our authors. Joy Hakem, Charles Mann, Michael, who did the video. We want to give them credit for their research. Well, in order to do that, we might use quotations, and we could say, according to the text states, the author wrote on page, or the author says. We see these examples where we can give them credit. So as we discuss these next questions, think about these sentence stems to use in your writing. As far as we know, no people is native to America. How does Hakem explain Native Americans? Well, if we go back to chapter 4 and we look at where she discusses natives, we see it has two meanings. Anyone who is born in a country is native of that country. So many of us are Native Americans, but it also means to have an origin or beginning in a country. That information was found on page 19, and I could use that direct quote to explain that. Now, as we look at the next discussions, think about these to discuss. Maybe explain it to your parents. Explain it to your little brother or older brother or sister, and think about the things we're reading. And as we look at this, we're going to have evidence from the text. You may not have the text, so I'll pull some of that with me as I discuss this with you. But think about the early accomplishments of the Native Americans. Explain what happened to the animals as the Ice Age ended. So, for example, we can see some of the information there from our notes is that they were called Indians. Columbus thought he was in the Indies. And notice when we put notes down, we'll discuss this again with TWR, we don't have to write complete sentences. We're jotting down notes, we're having a discussion. Here we see that native is born in a country or having an origin or beginning in that country. But some of the things that they really accomplished were they were good hunters. There were many animals. They would stampede into ditches and tools with atlatls and hunt for survival. And then they overhunted, where they became extinct. We see that on our word wall. They killed too many. But the mammoth ran out of water and grass. Sometimes we're not even sure why the others died. Maybe they had germs from the humans. But the Indians also were very good at catching fish, gathering nuts and berries, and they became farmers. They were very creative. They were great builders. They created the atlatl. They wove baskets. They sculptured pottery, made jewelry, invented the hammock, canoe, snowshoes, and locals. We see that the animals became extinct in the answer to our other question because of the warmer climate. Maybe they were infected by germs, or maybe the hunters just killed too many. Now, switching gears, we have looked at a lot of nonfiction information. We're going to finally get into our main text, the Birchbark House. So follow along as I read aloud The Girl from Spirit Island from the Birchbark House. Now, as I read, consider how the little girl in this text is like the infant in the Ice Age. This is from Louis Erdrich's The Birchbark House. The Girl from Spirit Island. The only person left alive on the island was a baby girl. The tired men who had come there to pick up furs from the Anishinaabe people stood uneasily on the rocky shore. The voyagers watched from a distance as the baby crawled in a circle, whimpering and pitiful. Her tiny dress of good blue wool was embroidered with white beads and ribbons. Her new moccasins were carefully sewn. It was clear she had been loved. It was also clear that the family who loved her was gone. All of the fires in the village were cold. The dead lay sadly in blankets, curled as though they were sleeping. Smallpox had killed them all. The voyagers trembled at the thought that the disease might already have chosen one of them. Surely, they muttered, the baby had the sickness too. She's sick. She looks tired. said one man when she lay down against one of the blanketed figures. Let her sleep. Birds were singing, dozens of tiny, white-throated sparrows. The trilling, rippling sweetness of their songs contrasted strangely with the silent horror below. First one, then the other of the men turned away. They got back into their canoes. As they paddled toward the next island, all were silent, thoughtful. Some wore hard expressions. One man had tears in his eyes. His name was Hat. He thought of his wife and decided that he would tell her about the baby. If there was anyone in the world who'd go and rescue that little girl, it was his wife. He shivered a little as he thought of her. He couldn't help it. Tallow, she was called, and sometimes she scared him with her temper. Other times he was amazed at her courage. He grimaced in shame. Unlike him, his wife was afraid of nothing. Now let's think for just a minute about how this little girl is like the infant from the Ice Age. Well, they were both left, no parents around to take care of them. They were both young and wondering who will take care of them to survive. Now, we look at this passage and we go a little further looking at this particular child to see what her example on Spirit Island is like. And so we take some of the passages from the story, and I'll read the passage and then we'll look at some questions to explain maybe what's going on to develop ideas for this passage. The tired men who had come there to pick up furs from the Anishinaabe people stood uneasily on the rocky shore. The voyagers watched from a distance as the baby crawled in a circle, whimpering and pitiful. Well, how does this first sentence of this section help you understand the situation? Well, the men were tired. They were there to pick up furs, maybe to stay and rest for a little bit. How does Erdrich describe the men who came to pick up the furs? Well, they stood uneasily on the rocky shore. Well, that means they were nervous about something. What actions of the voyagers does Erdrich use to explain how they responded to the little girl? It says that they watched from a distance. They did not want to get close to the little girl. How do you imagine the little girl? Well, the author describes the baby as she is whimpering and pitiful. She was probably hungry. Sometimes babies that are hungry and tired whimper. Imagine you're left with no one there. But then the men also not taking care of you, not helping you, but they are nervous. They are uneasy. Our next passage we'll look at changes a little bit. Birds were singing, dozens of tiny white-throated sparrows. The trilling, rippling sweetness of their songs contrasted with the silent horror below. First one, then the other of the men turned away. They got back into their canoes. And why do you think Erdrich describes the birds? I love this, and as we look throughout the whole novel, we'll see this again. Erdrich describes the birds to help us understand that there was still, the birds represent life. There is still life on the island. Maybe a little bit of happiness, hope. How does Erdrich describe the infant's surroundings? But now we see around the infant, it is a silent horror. Because what has happened to the infant's family? We learned as we continue to read that the family had died of smallpox. The men get back into their canoes, and what does that mean for the little girl? The little girl is left alone on the island. She might not survive. Imagine. As we continue to look at our TWR activities, and we've been talking about sentences and fragments. Again, remember from our previous lessons, we talked about a fragment is not a complete thought. but a sentence is a complete thought with a subject and a predicate, we look at the idea that we are going to change these fragments into complete sentences as well as add correct capitalization and punctuation. We're also going to look back, like we did at a paragraph from the video Ice Age, we're going to look at a paragraph where we've got some fragments as well. Well, as we look at this, we see the idea that became extinct. Well, all right, based on what we had been reading about, what became extinct? Well, as we remember reading from chapter 4, that the species, our word we've been writing about, many species became extinct. Really, no one knows why, and that's what's so interesting. And then we have the warmer climate. The warmer climate, what? So we see, and it told us that the mammoths had a hard time with the warmer climate. The warmer climate may not have been suitable for the large mammoths. Now, switching gears a little bit, this was from chapter 4 of our History of Americas. This is from the Birchbark house, our girl from Spirit Island. We have fragments in this passage, but it really explains a little bit about what was going on and what we read. We're going to identify the fragments and then write it in a complete sentence. There are many reasons why the men might not have rescued the little girl. Walked across a land bridge to the New World. The men may have thought the infant was too weak to migrate. In Ice Age, we saw saber-toothed cats go after a mother and her infant, feared for their safety, killed by the smallpox disease. The text says, surely they muttered the baby had the sickness too. They may have been afraid to catch the disease. As you can see, one main reason the men may not have rescued the baby was fear. How awesome that is. Even though we are looking at fragments, we have just integrated all three of the things that we've been working with the Ice Age. We talked about the first Americans. We talked about the video Ice Age, as well as in our Birchbark house. If you go back, I hope you caught it. Walked across a land bridge to the New World. There's our first fragment. How about, can you find the next one? Feared for their safety and killed by the smallpox disease. So we can take time now and quickly write these as complete sentences and see that the Native Americans have more room than I do. The Native Americans walked across a land bridge to the New World. Well, who feared for their safety? The men. And then killed by the smallpox disease. Well, we saw the infant's family. So as we look at all of these examples, we see that we have combined our First Americans, our video of the Ice Age, as well as the introduction to the Girl from Spirit Island from the Birchbark House to see how they all integrate into one idea. Pretty awesome. In this lesson, we learned that the Native Americans were successful in the New World. We also integrated information from several texts to respond to our prompts. I've enjoyed starting the Birchbark House with you. It's an incredible novel, but it also is important to see the nonfiction things we can tie in to support this, things that are, even though they're fictional, are based on facts. I look forward to our next lesson when we look at Chapter 9 and discuss more about Native Americans. I hope to see you then.